Welcome to a Modern Nonprofit podcast, powered by the Charity CFO, your compass for creative solutions in running your nonprofit. I'm Tasha Anderson, your host and guide through this nonprofit maze. From fundraising to volunteer management, we've got your back. Join us each episode for fresh, game-changing strategies that can make a real impact. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm your host, Tasha Anderson. And today I bring a new friend, John Renouard. John is the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization that is called WHOlives. And we're going to dive into your story, John. But before we begin, let me just do a shameless plug. This content is found by engagement. The more people that are subscribed, liking, engaging, sharing, the whole point of this podcast was designed to create resources and share new and innovative and modern ways of approaching running a nonprofit. So before we dive into the conversation, if you haven't engaged, shared, liked, rated, whatever you can do to support this podcast from having a greater reach, having more people access us, make sure you do that on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere where you're listening to this content. Please feel free to do that. Okay, now that I did that shameless plug, John, I want to go ahead and first of all kind of introduce you and hear a little bit more about your story. As I mentioned, John, you are the founder. I always love talking to other fellow founders and executive director of an organization called WHOlives. So let's just dive right in to that. How did you get started in the nonprofit world? Because everyone I talk to that starts a nonprofit never grew up thinking I'm going to be a leader or a founder of a nonprofit and this is my life destiny. So tell me how you got started in this space.
Yeah, exactly. And I had the same story that my career path and being a founder of a nonprofit was never in the playbook. But it started with a trip that I took with my family. My son had been doing a couple of years of humanitarian and missionary work in Africa, specifically in Kenya and Tanzania. And he was kind of finishing up his work. He came home and I was just curious about what he had been going through the last 2 years. My wife and I had traveled extensively through Mexico, Central America, South America, but really hadn't ventured too far off of that path. And so he took the opportunity to take my family over to Africa. And what I noticed when I first got there, that Africa had a different type of poverty. I was used to poverty. I spent, quite a bit of time in Mexico City. And so I had seen poverty before, but I hadn't seen water poverty before. And I have 6 children. Too many. 3 boys, 3 girls. I'm just teasing. And I kept on putting my daughters in the place of these girls that I see working every morning, getting up at 4 or 5 a.m. to walk 3 or 4 miles to get dirty water to bring it back home and then get ready to go to school. And it just struck a chord, right? It just struck a nerve, like a lot of people. That's how it's just like, wow, this just is. There's got to be a better way. And so on the plane trip home, I kind of came away from that trip kind of angry that here we were, this is 2010, and we're still living like this. To be honest with you, I had no idea that people were still fetching water every single day of their lives. And I decided to do something. And the simplest for me was, man, if we could somehow fix the water problem, then almost by default, we're going to fix half of the healthcare problems, because we go visit these healthcare centers and half the people there were there because of dirty water issues. And then I figured if they had clean water and they were healthy, then that would allow them to create opportunity to go to school, opportunity to go to work, opportunity to be more engaged in the community because they're not spending half or their entire day fetching water. So that actually became the acronym for WHOlives. So it's water, health, and opportunity. And my gosh, that's 14 years ago. And the time has flown. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Prior to this, my wife and I owned 9 real estate companies and would have 400 to 600 employees at any time. And I'll be honest with you, that was a cakewalk. I thought that was so hard. That was a cakewalk compared to running, a grassroots foundation like WHOlives. But that's how we got started.
Well, thank you for validating all of the nonprofit leaders out there, and I love hearing that because it's so easy sometimes from the outside. I've served on boards. I currently serve on boards, and I'd be really careful just to assume it's that easy. It is
Yeah.
not that easy, and especially compounded with some of the challenges you have. You're trying to run this organization to benefit communities that are halfway across the world, and
Yes.
I'm sure you have other differences and in compliance or governmental or even just communities, culture differences, and things
Yeah.
like that. So let's dive in a little bit more into like what Who Lives does. Your story really, I get a lot of people that reach out and want to share their kind of nonprofit story on the podcast. And typically I just try to be really selective about that because I really want to share stories of people that have done really innovative things in
Yeah.
either their operations or their just kind of their approach to leading a nonprofit that I think would be beneficial or at least something to consider for other nonprofits. So what really stood out to me about Who Lives is your operating model. You're not simply just raising money from the US or other sources, right? To then shift money over to these various communities. I know you originally said Africa, but you have a far greater reach than that we can dive
Yes.
into later. But you're not just funneling money from one source to the next or going into communities and telling people, hey, this is how it needs to be done. Tell me how your operating model is a little bit different. Or share, I guess share, I already know how it's
Yeah.
different, but you take a different approach than I'm just going to send you money to like fix your problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Tasha,
Can
you,
you
you,
share
you
that?
hit you hit the nail on the head. And um, when I got into this space, it was me volunteering my time. And so I wanted to make a difference. And I think everybody wants to make a difference, but I wanted
For
to
sure.
solve problems. I didn't want to just
Mhm.
put a Band-Aid on it. I'm not doing it for the accolades. I'm not doing it for my friends and neighbors. Oh, what a wonderful, John, no, I wanted to
Mhm.
solve the problems. And that was my only goal. And so I think one thing that's kind of missing a lot of times in our space is the charge and the ability to innovate.
Mhm.
And we seem to be doing the same things over and over again,
Mhm.
expecting a different result, and we all know what that's called.
Mhm.
And so we did take a different approach, and says the whole goal was how do we solve the problems? And so one of the first things that came to me was, how can we get more clean water to these villages? And you're right, we're now in 42 countries,
Wow.
and about 30 of them are inside of Africa, about 28 actually inside of Africa, and the remainders are spread across the world. A lot of the islands, Haiti and Vanuatu and the Philippines, Mexico, Central America, South America, and
Wow.
even some communities closer to home, Belize and other locations. Anywhere that there's a need for clean water, but as I was thinking about how can we do this, literally in the middle of the night, this idea came to me for a human-powered drill. I mean, like if we can create something that was so inexpensive that almost anybody can go and drill their own water well, wow, that would be something. And so I think that
Mhm.
idea was in my head. Literally in the middle of the night, I had this idea for the village drill, what we now call the village drill. I get up and I actually draw it out on the kitchen table and this idea.
Mhm.
And now I had never drilled a well before. I grew up in Southern California in the USA, and my water came out of a tap.
Right.
So I wasn't even positive what I was drawing. And you know how dreams are sometimes, they fade pretty quickly. And so,
Mhm.
after, probably 15, 20 minutes of doodling, I said, well, that's it. I'm going back to bed. Now,
Mhm.
the strange thing happened the next day when I got a call from the engineering department at our local university that I had attended. And now I attended the finance. I didn't know where the engineering building was at. So
Right.
my background is finance. But I had called the university about 2.5 months earlier, just to ask a question about a brick making machine of all things. And
Mhm.
somehow, when I left the message, that got to the desk of the person who was in charge of what's called a capstone program. A capstone program
Mhm.
is where the senior year of a university student is spent on a real life problem. And so this particular program had 32 projects. Mine was one of 32 projects, but he calls me and he asked me if I have a project for him to work on. Now, I didn't dare tell him I had a dream the night before about this village drill, but I told him I've had this idea for quite a while, hours and hours, about a human-powered drill. And anyways, we got together. Of course, it's a university, so you pay them some money to basically hire these students to take your idea and make it a reality. And you can see in the back, that's actually a half-scale model of what we now call the village drill. And so, but this is innovation. This is what changes how we do things. Because prior to the village drill, to drill a well and to have the power to get into the clean water, it would cost the village $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Well, there's no way a village in these developing countries could ever afford that. And so they had to rely on handouts. They had to rely on other people, other people's charity. But now with the innovation of the village drill, they can now put that well in for $3,000 or $4,000. And now if you spread that up, across the village, a well can service about 1,000 people. Okay, on average, that's about 200 families. Well, if 200 families pay $20, okay, well, that's $4,000. That's enough to get a well. Now, if you take $20 and you divide it out over 10 months, well, that's only $2 a month per family. And so what we did was I said, okay, we'll give you the loan. We'll loan each family the $20 and they'll pay it back at $2 a month, which is very affordable, even in the poorest of countries. Now, they always tell me, oh, they can't even afford to. They can. No, they can. They're buying things that are still not necessary. The number one thing, unfortunately, is alcohol, and they're spending more of that on alcohol. So $2 a month, when you're making $4 to $6 to $8 a day, $2 a month is affordable. And so we created a program where now the people can do this themselves. In reality, that was the key to our growth, is we went away from giving them something where now you're responsible for it and you have to maintain it, to where now they're buying it and they take the responsibility. Now they have the pride of ownership, and now they'll maintain it and they'll take care of it and they'll cherish it. And that's made all the difference in the world, in the water sector that we mainly deal in.
Tell me, I think I read on your website some villages that have even earned money off of these wells. Can you share some of that too? I thought that was really interesting. So to the point of, well, maybe they can't afford that, but there's been other creative ways for how these villages were able to pay for rather than just out of their own personal pockets. I'm curious about that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and that was another part of our, how do we make sure that everybody is involved? And so when we go to a village and now I say what we have done is set up drilling teams in each of these countries. And it's actually the drilling teams that we train to go to the villages to go and do this. And the drilling team in that country is a self-sustainable business. They totally live on their profit and or their losses. And so they have to, they have to produce, they have to get clean wells because their reputation depends upon it. And so that's number one. Now, when they go to these communities, we want to make sure that everybody was involved. So the first thing that we tell them to do is have the village, there's going to be a certain percentage, let's just say 10% of the village who can't afford $2 a month. It's the grandmother who lost her children to AIDS and she has 6 grandchildren. It's the person who was in an auto accident or and can't work. So there's going to be a percentage of the village that can't do it. So now it's up to the village to either sponsor them or find something that they can do for the village. Second to that is we go in and we create some sort of an economy in every village that we go. Now that you have clean water, what can you do with that clean water? Can you start a chicken program, selling eggs and poultry? Can you obviously fish comes to mind because you got clean water. Something interesting, I'll go back to those chickens. When chickens drink dirty water, they'll lay 2 to 3 eggs a week. When they drink clean
Mm.
water and are healthy, they'll lay 6 to 7 eggs a week. So almost
Oh,
immediately
interesting.
with clean water, you have you have more income coming in.
Food source too. Yeah.
Goats, if they're drinking clean water, will have an additional gestation period during the year, so they'll have 3 as opposed to 2, and other things
Wow.
that come about because of clean water. Farming, just small scale agricultural farming. If you add just 10% more water, so just a little bit more water than the rainwater that they're getting, you can increase your yields of your crops by 10, 15, 20, up to 50%. And on some of the vegetables that are grown. So water, and especially clean water, makes a huge difference in the economy. And so we introduce that. And then the last thing we
Right.
do is we take care of that percentage that can work but just don't have work. And let's go back to that family with the grandmother and the grandchildren. Well, let's say that they're that they're still healthy and able to work. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we'll give them the materials to create jewelry, just simple
Mm.
bracelets and things of that nature that we can then either sell in our community, or we'll sell them to the there's a different name for where they sell all these trinkets in all these different countries, but we'll take them to we call it the Akamba. We'll take it to the
Mm-hmm.
Akamba, and they can easily by just doing a couple bracelets a day earn $2 a month in profit selling
Mm.
these bracelets to the Akamba. And so now that family is totally engaged. And so when that water is ready, it's theirs, and they just feel this pride of
Mm-hmm.
ownership. So giving everybody ownership and giving them the opportunity to create income is a huge part of what WHOlives does, and part of our everyday life is give them that sense of pride.
I love that. We talked a lot about just like tangible goods that can come out of, clean water, but some of the other things that, we probably take for granted with those of us that have accessible or access to clean water. It's just the time to get back, like
Yeah,
you were talking about before, being able to work, being able to go to school, solving some of these other, challenges for these families and these communities that have had to spend most of their days getting water rather
yeah,
than attending school for their
right.
children or finding other employment or other activities during the day other than sourcing water. I'm curious, you mentioned, John, you're the finance person. I'm a finance person. I always like to geek out,
Yeah.
operationally how this all happens. So I have a couple questions as it relates to that. So you have all these, it's called micro loans out to
Mhm.
these various villages. And for nonprofits that have like, kind of pondered this idea of let's empower the people we're trying to serve, let's not make them feel like we're just trying to give handouts and solve their problems. But on an actual administrative scale, I'm kind of curious how you all handle these in our world, in our currency, kind of micro payments, micro loans, like administratively. How do you track all of these? Is that hard to do?
So we have actually simplified it, and the first thing that we did is that we removed WHOlives from the whole equation. So again, when the loans that we give, they're actually being given by the local drilling cooperative that's going to go and drill the
Mm,
wells. So when they're dealing
mm,
with paying back their loan, you're not dealing with them paying back in their mind what they consider, well, that it's a rich American NGO, they
mm,
don't need my
mm,
money. And so,
mm,
so it would be very difficult to have them pay back an NGO. And to be honest with you, it's part of the culture. And if I'm a rich uncle and I loan my nephew, $500, I'm actually loaning it with like a wink and a smile. There really is not an expectation that he's going to pay me back because I'm the rich uncle.
sure,
And
sure.
certainly NGOs are the same way. So as far as they
Okay.
know, as far as the villages know, they're dealing with a local organization, and
Mm,
and that's huge. And again,
mm.
people say, "Well, how do you get your name out there?" We don't care. We just care
That's not
about
the
solving the
point.
problem. We don't care that they.
Oh,
Matter of fact,
interesting.
we do not allow them because after everything's kind of set up and it's done, we'll come back and visit, and they find out about us, and they're, oh my gosh, you guys are great and wonderful. And a lot of times they want to actually put our name like on their water tower, and we don't let them, because it's not ours,
Mm,
it's theirs. They paid for it,
mm,
it's theirs. Yeah, we maybe give them a hand up, but it's theirs, and we want them to have that ownership.
mm,
Every time they look at that pump, even though we financed it, we don't want them to think that, oh yeah, well, if it wasn't for them, we couldn't have done it. No, they could have done it on
mhm,
their own, and we want to give them that pride of ownership. And I'm telling you,
mm,
that is huge. I'm going to segue a little bit and give you two examples. Just last year, we had a group of people that we took down to kind of visit the different schools and places that we were putting in some wells. And we visited
mhm,
one school where the local politician paid for the well. So they got their well for free. And when we got there, it was amazing that all of a sudden the children, the teachers, the community was like saying, oh, hey, thanks so much for this. Well, we know that you helped us out. Hey, we need a roof on our school. We need school books. We need this. We need that.
mhm,
And it was just a give me type of situation. Now, compare
mhm.
that to another village that we went to where they paid for it on their own. And we pull into there, and all they want to do is show us what they have done
Oh,
with that well.
mhm,
It's like, hey, and they showed us
mm,
their garden center. They showed us how they have the girls are now coming to school all day and then carrying the
mm,
water home with them at night. And
mm,
it was such a stark contrast between the entity that owned it and the entity that got it for free. And
mm,
that's nearly 100% of the time. We have to get
mm.
away from this idea that we're helping them by giving them things, because if you're a parent, you already know this, and I have 6 kids I mentioned, you already know what, when you give things away, when you just give them things, it just has
Mm,
such little value. But when they
mm,
earn it,
right.
it's a completely different feeling. I have this argument with my peers where the parents want to give their kids a brand new car, a 40,
Yeah.
$50,000 car. Well, I remember when I bought my first car on my own, and that sense of pride that
Mhm,
I had when I bought my first brand new car. Now I was into my mid-20s before I could do that.
sure.
Had my parents given me a brand new car when I was in high school, that would not have had near the impact or near the sense of pride. And so what we're doing when we give things away, we're robbing them of that feeling that
Mm,
I can do this
ownership.
myself, this pride, and they just end up waiting for other people to give and give and give. Where when you teach them that you can do this on your own, then that just multiplies, and they say, well, what else can we do on our own? What else? And all of a sudden now they're
Mhm,
improving their road. So now they can bring traffic in there. So if they're growing crops, they can get a truck in there to
right.
haul their product away so they can sell it at a higher price instead of carrying it back, out to the market on their backs where half of the fruit might go to waste. So it's amazing
Mm.
to see the progress of villages when you give them that opportunity to thrive
Mhm.
because you give them an opportunity to grow.
So I've been thinking about this as you're speaking. I think that's really interesting that you don't really directly deal with the installation or kind of the sale of the financing of the wells. And I'm kind of curious. I think that's fascinating. I'm curious how you were able to like find and identify these teams, and not just internationally, right? If we were to really start incorporating some of these principles or mindset, and this isn't the first time I've had conversations about how do you um, get people that you're helping to feel a sense of co-ownership in this, or a sense of pride in what they're trying to accomplish and things like that. I've been in the nonprofit space for close to 20 years, and I've been part of many conversations of nonprofits trying to explore this. So I'm thinking, yes, you set up these community-based teams in these various countries. How could we replicate something like that, say in the United States within different communities? Obviously your situation is much different, but how do you take that same principle? I'm curious how you even did that, or how you even find the people and trust the people, make sure that they're not, creating some shark loan situation and
Yeah.
taking advantage of the people you're trying to help and serve. But then also kind of on a bigger scale, how do we start exploring what that might look like in kind of our own communities here within the US, because we have so many, what's 1.7, 1.8 million nonprofits, something like that, they say. And I think here, even in St. Louis, where I'm at, they're saying like somewhere like 15,000 nonprofits just in, you know, the kind of general St. Louis city area. It's really quite high in number. And I'm just thinking, how do you create that intimate relationship, you know, kind of an exchange of transaction rather than kind of more of a handout situation? And I don't know how to make that work. I'm sure you've thought about it. I'm sure you've had conversations, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I've consulted with a lot of groups on this principle because it is a new principle, especially here in the US. And here's the key. You need to ask yourself, am I empowering them, or am I just solving am I just putting a Band-Aid on something? So you separate into two categories. And I sometimes I think of it like, you know, a storm has come in and ravaged the city. When a storm has come in and ravaged the city, you need to take care of the people and their immediate needs, and you don't worry a lot about you know, loans and paying it back. So if there's a tornado that hits, hey, we're all going to come together. We're going to clean this up. We're going to clear the roads. We're going to help the people get on their feet. Once you take care of their immediate needs, the second question is, am I empowering them? And so many times we get this feeling of helping by giving, not realizing that we're actually creating more dependency every time we do that. And so even in the roughest of neighborhoods and the roughest of situations, you have to ask the question, am I empowering them? Am I creating an opportunity for them to grow, to become self-sustainable? And if the answer is no, stop doing it. Please stop doing it. Giving out handouts, what you are doing, you're just creating dependency. And it's just, we all know this intuitively. And a lot of times, you know, this can become kind of a toxic, you know, conversation, but it doesn't need to be. It's just common sense. If I'm getting something for free, it doesn't have the same value as if I earned this. And you know, I learned this from this is off the top of my head, so the story doesn't make sense. I apologize in advance. But I remember I would take my kids on vacation, and I remember at Disneyland, and also my kids were like, "I want an ice cream. I want an ice cream." Now we gave all the kids. They're younger, and this is a few years ago, but we gave all the kids age appropriately somewhere between $10 and $20 just to spend. You don't have to ask mom and dad, right? Just you spend it any way you want to. And so I remember we're at Disneyland, and everybody wanted an ice cream. Daddy, give me an ice cream. And I said, great, I'll pay for half. Okay. No one wanted an ice cream. You know, even though it would have only cost them $2 instead of $4, which is ridiculous for an ice cream. But all of a sudden they didn't want it. It wasn't that important. When I said, hey, okay, I'll split it with you. And it's kind of weird that I take that aha moment back, you know, when I was a young parent, you know, to what I do today internationally. But it is, let them decide how they're going to do it. Find ways to make them more profitable themselves, and create that sense of pride and self-reliance. That's what's missing in our humanitarian work. There's other things, but that's a big part of it. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. I love that. I love that as a fellow finance person, the budgets. I already have my 9-year-old on all kinds of budgets. We run on fiscal quarters and the Anderson household. I do have one burning question for you, because I mean, certainly you're a nonprofit. So a lot of what we're talking about too, I think, is obviously an operational decision, a bit of a funding decision, and certainly an approach to your program, right? More of like principles and how you want to run the program and the outcomes you hope to have, and the impact you hope to have in the communities. And I love all of that. I am curious because I am the accountant. I have to geek out, and I don't know if anybody else listening is going to have this question. So we kind of open this up. I really love this operating model, and so many nonprofits I've worked with have tried to explore more of an earned income model, not just for purposes of being self-sustaining and relying less on donations because of the fluctuation
Yeah.
and the strings attached and all of the things, right? So obviously a financial and operational impact, but also for a lot of the same kind of things that you've talked about. How do we stop robbing people of feeling like a sense of accomplishment or pride or
Yeah.
ownership in what they're either receiving or accomplished, right? So I'm very curious as a financial person, how much of your funding, if you don't mind sharing, is made up of some of this earned income, and how much of it is fundraised? Because I know you still supplement many wells. Obviously, you have a
Right.
fundraising need still for your organization. How much of that is earned through the payments or the purchase
Yeah.
price of these wells
Yeah.
for villages, and how much do you still have to fundraise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're probably less than 20% of our income is coming from the repayments of these loans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the good news is it's gone from 4% to 8 to 12 to
Okay.
22, and so
Wow.
and
Okay.
so right now we have, and that's because of lessons that we've learned, and
Okay.
how to make it financially worthwhile for the groups that are collecting the funds in these different countries. There
Mm-hmm.
has to be a financial incentive for them to do so. And so the way it typically works is the groups will go and get a contract to drill a well. Now they're going to need
Mm-hmm.
$4,000 to drill that well, as we talked about before. And so
Yeah.
so we'll give them the 4,000. Basically, they tell the community, okay, we're loaning you these funds. The community never
Mm-hmm.
touches the money, but
Mm-hmm.
the drilling group says, okay, we're going to fund this for you. You need to pay us back. Well, we have now, where before we only had one group that was even in the 80s on paying back their loans. Now we have about half the groups that are in that 60 to 80% payback,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know, maybe that doesn't sound like a lot. That's huge. It is huge, the strides that we're making. And the way it works, they actually never send the money back to us. But let's say that a group collects, let's say they have 5 wells and everybody's paying back their loan.
Mm-hmm.
That group has collected, let's say, $2,000 that month. Well, the next month they're going to do another well. Instead of us having to send them 4,000, they've
Mm-hmm.
already collected 2,000. So now we only have to send them 2,000.
Then 2000.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And
So
so,
basically
yeah,
your programmatic expenses are going down
going down
while your
and
impact is
yes,
going up,
yeah.
right?
And we're
Yeah. Oh,
working
interesting.
on, yeah, and again, obviously the goal is to make it completely self-sustainable,
Right.
and where it's fun to see that growth. Because I'm telling you, if we were just collecting tennis shoes from everybody and then passing them out, and everybody says,
Mm,
"Oh, hey, thanks for," I mean, it'd be so much easier. What we're doing is not easy,
right. Right.
and people have to know that. And you have to be okay with failure. You have to be okay with,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that didn't work, or yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
had a different impact than we were hoping for. Yeah, that opened
Mm-hmm.
up an opportunity you had mentioned for somebody to do, to do a loan and enforce, either high interest or more
Mm-hmm.
penalties or favors, and
Yeah.
we live in a world where, if I give you something, I want something in return, and there's
Mm-hmm.
women who have been taken advantage of in order to get a loan, and so you have to
Mm-hmm.
be very, very, very aware and cautious, and keep your
Right.
antennas up, and look for those things, look for those unintended consequences,
Yeah.
all the time, and pivot when you notice those things. So we're no way are we perfect yet. But I love the fact that we're getting better and better, and that we have now many communities that are paying their loans
Mm.
back. at 80% or above,
Yeah,
which
that's
is actually
incredible.
higher than what Americans pay back on their credit cards. And um, so again,
You
we're doing okay.
I've heard so many times with working with nonprofits that our goal would be that there's no need for us to exist. And it
Yeah,
sounds like maybe you're on your way, John.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe someday you can retire and say, I'm
I
no
want
longer
my
needed.
life back.
Says every
Yeah,
nonprofit leader ever, for sure. Well,
yeah,
John, this has
yeah,
been an incredible conversation. I love hearing that. Thanks for being transparent about your story. And I especially love that you have to be okay with failing. I think
yeah.
that's every entrepreneur spirit. I think we need more of that in the nonprofit space and the grace to allow people to fail because that's how we come up with innovative ways of solving real problems. So, this has been such an awesome conversation, John. Thank you again for your transparency and your openness and sharing your story in the cool way that you've been able to somehow figure out the impossible.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was no easy feat. I can relate to that. So, thank you again for being on. I appreciate it.
Tasha, it's been my pleasure. What a great platform you have here, and I appreciate the time to share my thoughts. Thanks again, Tasha.
Thanks again. Okay, everybody, like I said, if you have not had a chance to subscribe or to share our content, please do. Until next time, friends, we'll see you later.
That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Tasha Anderson with the Charity CFO, and this is a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast on all major streaming platforms so you will stay notified for when the latest episode drops, which will help you stay in the know about anything nonprofit related. Also, join our community on Facebook by searching for a Modern Nonprofit Podcast and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.